Peter B. Collins News and Comments. It's Wednesday, October 18th, 2017. Quick update on the California fires. Wine country is settling down. We have 80% containment in many of the mega fires that have broken out over the last week or so. The new concern is south of San Jose. As I mentioned yesterday, the community of Boulder Creek in the redwood-infested Santa Cruz Mountains has a fire that is only 10% contained, and people are being evacuated. My lead story today is something that I have been fomenting about for a long time, and that is the selective restriction on our First Amendment right to participate in boycotts. In particular, the sanctioning of people and businesses who support BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions aimed at the State of Israel for its illegal settlements and for its treatment of the Palestinian people. And today I want to single out for praise a teacher from Kansas. Her name is Esther Kuntz. And because of her religious beliefs and her membership in the Mennonite Church USA, she has decided to support her church, and she is rejecting the requirements of a recently passed state law that is quite extreme in Kansas. It was passed just this year, House Bill 2409, and it tries to discourage boycotts of Israel by prohibiting state contracts with individuals who refuse to say they will not engage in boycott activity. Now, listen to that language. You have to acknowledge, you have to pledge not to participate in boycott activity. This is a draconian measure that is clearly unconstitutional, and I will cite the precedent from the Supreme Court in a moment. Now, this wide-ranging law encompasses even those who boycott only Israel settlements, because the language singles out Kansans who refuse to engage in commercial relations with persons and entities engaged in business with Israel and Israeli-controlled territories. It's almost compulsory to engage in such activity if you take the spirit of this new law. So Esther Kuntz was selected to be a teacher trainer at the Kansas Department of Education, which, by the way, is decimated because of the tax cuts that Governor Sam Brownback rammed through the legislature several years ago. That aside, as part of her employment with this program, she was asked to sign a statement that she does not boycott Israel, and she stood by her personal faith and moral convictions, refusing to sign the statement. So she was then in turn denied payment as a contractor to the state of Kansas. The ACLU has announced this week it'll be suing on behalf of Esther Kuntz, alleging that her First Amendment rights were violated. It filed a memo in support of her motion for preliminary injunction with a federal court. Now, the clear illegality and unconstitutionality of this is based on a 1982 Supreme Court decision involving a group of NAACP activists and others who boycotted certain white merchants over demands for desegregation. The case was NAACP versus Claiborne Hardware. The white merchants took legal action to attempt to recoup damages from the boycott. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, which unanimously decided that the government cannot prohibit politically motivated boycotts. It's simple to me. The First Amendment says that we may speak freely, and I believe that controlling our dollars and deciding not to spend them in a way that violates our principles is a fundamental First Amendment right. And Rabbi Joseph Berman of Jewish Voice for Peace says whether in Kansas or in Congress, this kind of legislation is anti-democratic, an attempt to silence a nonviolent movement for equality for Palestinians and a just peace for everyone in the region. It sets an alarming precedent of curtailing free speech in an era when mobilizing grassroots energy to resist repressive government policies is more important than ever. I will continue to fight these egregious incursions into our First Amendment rights We have a watered-down version of that law on the books in California. So far, I have not seen any attempt at enforcing it. The state of New York, under Governor Cuomo, imposed an executive order. And we have seen that Friends of Israel have been inserting these bills in state legislatures across the country. I've commented on the 60 Minutes Washington Post broadcast and revelations that occurred on Sunday and Monday regarding the opioid epidemic in this country that is claiming the lives of tens of thousands of Americans now every year. And I noted that while the story was pretty good and it relied on former people who worked at the DEA, it exposed the distributors of OxyContin and the related opioid drugs. They're highly addictive, and they have led to many overdose deaths, some directly related to the pharmaceutical, others related to street drugs like heroin and fentanyl that were used after people got cut off of their opioid pharmaceutical supplies. So one of the questions I asked was, well, what about Purdue? Purdue Pharma is the manufacturer of OxyContin. They have made billions of dollars while addicting many people across America, promoting the drug for prescription on a very reckless basis. And I will commend Vice News for its report today exposing, after a Freedom of Information Act disclosure of 3,000 pages from the Chris Christie Commission on Opioids, that Purdue Pharma got one of its executives to meet with a member of the commission that Christie was heading and to offer the company's ideas for how to address the addiction and the overdoses that are occurring. And Chris Christie, who I find a completely odious individual, when he was running for president in 2016, one of the surprises was that in New Hampshire and other places, he did express, I think, some compassion about those addicted to these drugs and was not proposing a hardline law enforcement crackdown because we know that the war on some drugs has failed, and we also know that Congress is, I think, implicated in the lax treatment of these pharmaceutical drugs. So Purdue, which is based in Connecticut, submitted 5 proposals to this commission, and many of them were included in the preliminary report that was published this summer. We'll see if they are still in the final report, which is due out, I think, on November 1st. So what is interesting here is that the predators have at least some influence with the Chris Christie Commission that is supposed to be addressing the problems that were caused by the people who are, supplying some of the current remedies. And they include, for example, limiting the duration of the first opioid prescription for people on Medicare. Doesn't say about all those fine folks in West Virginia who've been pumped full of these pills. They want to expand state prescription drug monitoring programs, require doctors who prescribe opioids to demonstrate competence. Well, 60 Minutes exposed these pill mills that were set up as pain clinics, where there would be a doctor who would, you pay him $15 or $25, I don't know what it was, but a modest fee, and the doctor would write you a prescription for the opioid of your choice. So these are proposals that really won't change the dynamic of this wave of addiction that has been promoted by legal pharmaceutical companies who, as I've said, have richly profited from it. And the article advice, which I've linked to in the show file for this podcast, shows how some of the language suggested by industry officials has shown up either paraphrased or almost word for word. And now we have the makers of Narcan. Now, this is the antidote. When you look at this, you have to scratch your head and say, okay, it's good that we have an antidote, and Narcan should be widely available, particularly in the areas where large numbers of opioid pills have been sold to patients. And Narcan, a carton with 2 doses, typically sells for $125. And the proposal from Narcan, which of course is selfless and just to help the poor people who are addicted, is that they are suggesting that every one of 11 million law enforcement officers in the U.S. be equipped with a $75 carton of Narcan. That's after their law enforcement discount. And that would generate $82 million for the pharmaceutical company Adapt. The profiteering here is really obscene. There's a lot of Sturm and Drang, and now it is being, turned into a multiple-day story by Trump himself about his bizarre reaction to a question about why he had not contacted the families, the survivors of 4 American soldiers who were killed 2 weeks ago in an ambush in Africa, in the nation of Niger near the Mali border. And by now you've probably heard that Trump said, Obama didn't make those calls. And that's not true. But in Trump fashion, now that he has been exposed, he actually made a call to the widow of one of those soldiers. The soldier was Sergeant LaDavid T. Johnson. And his widow, his mother, and a Florida congresswoman, Democrat Frederica Wilson, were on the way to the airport to pick up the dead soldier's remains when Trump called on a cell phone. And he reached the widow, whose name is Maisha Johnson. She is pregnant with her late husband's 3rd child. And the congresswoman went public because Trump was so inept, so insensitive in telling the woman, the widow, that, hey, this is kind of what we expect, all right? Here's the interpreted quote here. Wilson said that Trump was almost like joking. He said, well, I guess you knew. Something to the effect that he knew what he was getting into when he signed up, but I guess it hurts anyway. And the congresswoman continued, just matter-of-factly, that this is what happens. Anyone who is signing up for military duty is signing up to die. That's the way we interpreted it. It was horrible. It was insensitive. It was absolutely crazy, unnecessary. I was livid. And the widow said, the widow who was in tears, he didn't even remember my husband's name. Now, presidents make a lot of these calls, and usually they get a little 3x5 card that says, you're calling the widow, her name is this, and the soldier who was killed is named this, and here's a little blurb about who he was, and so you can have some sort of a conversation. But Trump just fumbled this so badly. And when exposed, of course, Trump, who can never apologize, just turns to his habit of pathologically lying. I didn't say what that congresswoman said, didn't say it at all. She knows it. I had a very nice conversation with the woman, with the wife, who sounded like a lovely woman. Did not say what the congressman said, and most people aren't too surprised to hear that. So he lies, and he feeds to his Twitter-addicted base the idea that the media is lying, that the congresswoman is lying. But these people were all in the same car on the way to the airport, and they have no reason to lie. Trump is the one who has the reason to lie. And the White House said on Tuesday that Trump has placed calls to the families of all 4 service members who were killed on October 4th. And I cringe as we await the reports from those other 3 calls. But Trump is unbowed. He says, Democrat Congresswoman totally fabricated what I said to the wife of a soldier who died in action, and I have proof. Sad! Exclamation point. That's a tweet. Trump didn't say what the proof is. Congresswoman Wilson said, I don't know what kind of proof he could be talking about. I have proof, too. And so she took to Twitter, which is this... I mean, how low will we go? Anyway, she said, I stand by my account of the call with Trump and was not the only one who heard and was dismayed by his insensitive remarks. And my bottom line here is that this is an embarrassment to the nation, and it would be to Trump if he had even an ounce of shame in him. But the media plays up this to embarrass Trump and doesn't give us any real details on the mission of U.S. combat forces in Niger, on the legal authority for the deployment of U.S. troops there, and any description of when they got there and what they're supposed to be doing and when they will presumably be coming back. And that's what really bugs me here, because American troops are on the line, and they shouldn't be dying in some senseless mission that is unexplained and probably incoherent. But the media is more interested in the Twitter shitfest. Oh, there's more. Trump tweeted today against the NFL ownership. They've been meeting, and they made a decision not to require football players to stand for the national anthem. And, of course, Trump, who just embarrassed us and operated in a way that you can argue is unpatriotic, dishonors the troops that he says died for the right of people to stand during the national anthem at a fucking football game. He says the owners of the league show total disrespect for our country. And this account in the Washington Post correctly recaps the history here. The Take a Knee action began as an attempt to call attention to racial issues, but Trump and others have turned it into an act against the flag and patriotism. And this kind of ritual, compulsory expression of fake patriotism really galls me. I never pledge allegiance. If I'm in public, I will stand while other people do so in a respectful manner, but I don't believe in pledging allegiance to the flag. Likewise, if I'm at a public event and the national anthem is played, I will stand. But I do not put my hand over my heart, and I don't sing along. But this has become this spectacle, and Trump is demanding that we all submit to his whim on this. And I'm glad to see that the NFL owners are at least resisting to some extent. Then we get to the issue of Trump, who last week, in his effort to drown Obamacare in the bathtub, announced that he was unilaterally cutting some key subsidies to insurance companies that go directly to offset the cost of coverage of low-income Americans. Then on Tuesday, after the announcement that Senators Patty Murray and Lamar Alexander have put together a package to restore those subsidies to prevent chaos in the insurance markets, Trump said, well, he might support that. He appeared to give his blessing to that deal. But today, back on Twitter, while he was probably on the porcelain throne, he backpedaled. He said, I am supportive of Lamar as a person and also of the process, but I can never support bailing out insurance companies who have made a fortune with Obamacare. Now, I agree in part here that one of the fundamental flaws of Obamacare was the gift of millions of subsidized clients for the for-profit insurance health insurance companies. But this is not directly a bailout to those companies. It was part of a complex package that I don't completely support, but that I do not support the just unilateral destruction of. It is too, it's just crazy and too reckless to do this to undermine the system and throw millions of Americans out onto the street with no health insurance. So the Democrats are angling to get the Murray-Alexander bill in place, attach it to the December bill that must pass to keep the government funded, and see if they can ram it down Trump's throat. In the meantime, I've seen on Facebook people with serious illnesses whose health insurance rates are being doubled. And it is directly because of the chaos that Trump has inserted into the healthcare markets. And this is, it's unconscionable, and it shows just how callous and cynical this guy is. And also ignorant. I just got to throw that out there because he really doesn't know what he's doing. And he doesn't appear, despite his whole persona as this savvy businessman, he doesn't understand the impact of what he's doing. It's all politics, and he's doing it to feed his base. And Chuck Schumer said, the president keeps zigging and zagging, so it's impossible to govern. Our only hope is maybe tomorrow he'll be for this again. That's a good line, Chuck. And the president described the Senate plan, quote, as a short-term solution so that we don't have this very dangerous little period, and I add, that he just created. Maddening. Truly maddening. Oh, and then a Maryland judge has joined the judge from Hawaii who yesterday issued a stay on the travel ban, the Muslim travel ban 3.0. The latest is a judge with an Asian surname, Theodore Chuang, district judge in Maryland, and I'm sure his ethnicity will probably draw a racist tweet from Trump. Well, I expect that in the next few days. He issued an injunction, and Chuang's ruling says the administration had not shown that national security cannot be maintained without an unprecedented 8-country travel ban. Oh, and there's more. Apparently trying to pave the way for a Capitol Hill Senate appearance by the embattled Attorney General who has often been belittled and undercut by his own president. Trump tweeted out this morning suggesting that former FBI Director Comey decided to spare Hillary Clinton from prosecution long before the investigation was completed. Now, there's an open question here because apparently Comey did draft a letter exonerating Hillary Clinton. He started writing it about 2 months before it was actually issued on July the 5th. But Trump is not really trying to get at the truth here. This is just another political firebomb lobbed into Twitter. The tweet read, FBI confirms report that Comey drafted letter exonerating crooked Hillary Clinton long before investigation was complete. Many people not interviewed, including Clinton herself. Comey stated under oath that he didn't do this. Obviously a fix. Where is Justice Department? So he throws up this diversionary storm, and then he questions what his own attorney general is doing about this. And, of course, because it's part of the Trump-Russia investigation, Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions III is recused. And so it's up to the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, to be answering this question. But it's just another diversion. And then Jeffrey Beauregard, Jim Crow Sessions III, went up to Capitol Hill today. Now, I would submit that if Tennessee Senator Bob Corker is Little Bob, that we should call Jeff Sessions Tiny Jeff. He is a man of diminutive stature, and that doesn't limit his capacity to hate and to push really bad legal policies. So it was just another game of dodge 'em, and you may see some interesting clips on TV news tonight. Al Franken gave him a 15-minute grilling, got nowhere. Pat Leahy of Vermont, the chair of the Judiciary Committee, tried to force Sessions to answer some questions. The most he got was that Sessions did admit that he is yet to be interviewed by special counsel Bob Mueller in the investigation into the Trump-Russia stuff. And a group of all of the senators on the committee had sent a letter to Sessions in advance saying, you're on notice that any reasonable period of abeyance on many of the issues that you have dodged in the past has long elapsed. But nevertheless, even Dianne Feinstein couldn't get him to say very much. I think Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota tried to get some answers out of him. And truly, not much of any importance happened. One more story about the Trumper. And that is, I've linked to a great piece that was published at Consortium News today by Jesselyn Radick and Kathleen McClellan. Radick is the attorney for many whistleblowers, including Ed Snowden, and McClellan is the deputy director of a pro-whistleblower organization called Whisper. And they are exposing how Trump has escalated the so-called insider threat campaign to silence potential whistleblowers. Now, the article does admit and acknowledge correctly that this began in 2012 under Obama, who was the most vicious crackdown artist on leakers in American history. But as recently as last month, the Pentagon has developed training courses, toolkits, templates, posters, videos, all aimed toward silencing and deterring anyone who would disclose to the press or the public information that the government once kept secret for no legitimate reason. And the article goes on to explain that the toolkit for the insider threat training includes a Fox News clip on the crackdown on leaks and the inspiring statement from Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who, of course, threatened anyone who is a future leaker. There also are slogans like, "There's no delete when you tweet," "Tweets sink fleets." Has anybody told Trump that? There's a poster, "Every leak makes us weak," "Think before you click." I mean, this is so juvenile. And adults who have security clearances, who've been entrusted with the nation's secrets, both legitimate and not, they have to sit through this bullshit. There's another informational video that includes a fictionalized news story about Americans dying in a terrorist attack because of a release of classified information. So far, we have no evidence that that has ever happened. And Radick and her colleague McClellan end the article by saying, after all, the biggest leaker of classified information is the United States government itself. Every day I pause for a minute to thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins Podcast. Kyle McClary just renewed an annual subscription. Jason Ferguson, Janet Price, Tim McKay, Joey Perillo, they're all strong supporters of the Peter B. Collins Podcast. And instead of asking you to support me today, I'd like to point you in two other directions. Roger and Carol Schuler, the people who left Alabama after Roger exposed a lot of the criminal behavior by elected officials there. They are now in exile in Missouri. They live week to week in a flea bag motel. And I got a note from Carol today that they need help with their rent this week. So if you can do that, drop by Roger's blog. It is legalschnauzer.blogspot.com. I'll put it in the show file for the podcast so you can easily link to it. And I hope you can be generous with them. Also, if you want to help out the recovery of the fire-tinged sections of California, the wine country, Napa and Sonoma counties, don't give money to the Red Cross. It's a lose-lose proposition. I invite you to go to your local liquor store or wine shop and buy a bottle of California wine and look on the label and make sure it was made in Napa or Sonoma. My favorite appellations are Carneros and the Sonoma Coast, but anything that says Napa on it, you're going to be helping an industry that is on its knees and that has been hit extremely hard. And the wine business has really bad cash flow to begin with, so if you just buy one bottle, you're going to be helping send a little cash into the wineries at a time when they desperately need it. We continue to watch the unfolding potential civil war in Spain, and tomorrow is the deadline set by the Madrid government run by Prime Minister Mariano Rajoy for Barcelona and Catalonia to submit and to say that we did not declare independence. If they don't, it does appear that Madrid will impose the Article 155 of the Constitution of Spain and assume direct control of the region. It's very hard to predict how that will play out. But ultimately, I believe that when you try to limit the aspirations of people who seek independence, you will fail. and blood will flow. Some new documents were released yesterday confirming what we already knew about the U.S. support in 1965 and 66 for a cruel and bloody crackdown on at least 500,000 people who died in Indonesia. And the U.S. supported the ousting of President Sukarno because he was considered both socialist and anti-American, and he was replaced by General Suharto, who held power for 32 years. And the U.S. not only kept quiet about all that stuff, but behind the scenes, our diplomats were supporting the preemptive killing of people or imprisoning them, and also, of course, the shift in power to Suharto. And this interesting comment from the New York Times: the legacy of the massacre continues to divide Indonesia. For decades under Suharto's rule, Indonesians dared not call for justice. Even after he was deposed in 1998, there was little effort to set up an Indonesian form of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Hey, New York Times, how about one of those here? How about on torture, on rendition, on surveillance, on the war in Iraq? And I'll stop there. Finally today, I want to take a couple of minutes here to update people outside California on some of the legislation that was signed into law or vetoed just in the past week here at the end of the legislative cycle by our governor, Jerry Brown. And I do have some praise for Brown. He stuck his neck out and signed a bill that makes California the first state in the country to offer a third gender option on birth certificates and driver's licenses. If you have a sexual identity that is not explicitly male or female, you can choose non-binary, which is described as an umbrella term for people who don't consider themselves strictly male or female. And I think that this is a very progressive thing to do. And there are a few other bills that he acted on. One that will disappoint some people, but I think he did the right thing, was he vetoed a bill that would have required a presidential candidate who wants to be on the ballot in California to release the last 5 years of his or her tax returns. And my state senator, Mike McGuire, carried the bill. But it is, as Jerry Brown described in his veto message, a slippery slope. He says, hey, what are they going to ask for next? A birth certificate, 5 years of health records? But Jerry Brown himself is a little hypocritical about this because he refused to release his own tax returns in his last 2 election campaigns. We don't know what Jerry Brown is hiding. He's wealthier than he lets on. But his dad owned shares in Indonesian oil companies after he left the governorship, which would have been about 1966. So not sure why Jerry won't release his tax returns, but I do think that on the narrow question of this bill, he probably made the right call. He also surprised me by rejecting an effort at preemption by the cell phone carriers here in California. Now, I want to hasten to add that I criticized Governor Brown a couple of months ago because he embraced preemption in his cap-and-trade bill, which preempted regional air quality management districts from imposing new regulations. And this eviscerated some efforts that were underway to impose new regulations on the smoke-belching Chevron refinery, which is just 3 miles across the bay from where I sit right now. But on the cell phone bill, which would have basically standardized rules at the state level and blocked any local regulation of the siting of cell phone antennas and related matters, well, Brown correctly vetoed that, and I am happy to report that. Let me quickly run down a few other bills that were acted on by the governor. You know about the increase in our gas tax to try to rebuild our roads and fill potholes. I fully support that. There's a package of bills that declared California a sanctuary state. I fully support that. He only signed 2 of 24 bills that came from the California Chamber of Commerce on their job killers list. He signed a bill that does give first-time community college students a 1-year free ride. Now, this is one of the wishes of Bernie Sanders from last year's campaign. I consider this to be a very progressive move, and it will only cost the state of California about $30 million. Parents who work at a small business will be able to take time to bond with their babies, but he rejected a bill to expand maternity leave for teachers. Not sure why. He did sign bills that require free tampons in low-income school bathrooms and other related female accessories, if I can call it that. He signed some bills to protect the state's health care system. He signed some landmark bills, 15 of them, aimed at shoring up our housing supply and trying to generate new affordable housing here in the Golden State. So that's a limited look at a total of 1,200 bills. He signed 879 and vetoed the rest. And that's your update on the outcome of the legislative season here in the one-party blue state rule, California. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. It's free, as you know, and you're free to find it on YouTube. I'm Peter B.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails.